Hello everyone, welcome to the second session about analysis specification and design of cyber-physical systems and IoT systems with modeling languages. Last Friday we were talking about two different kinds of diagrams that we use mainly to model or to do a conceptualization of the system. The first kind of diagram we talked about was block definition diagrams, and today we will continue with this kind of diagrams, and later in the last part of the session, maybe after the break, we will talk about the internal block definition diagrams. So if you remember last day, we ran all the examples with Papyrus, and we started talking about blocks. Do you remember what was the concept of block for us in the scope of this part of the course? What is a block for us? It's like an entity, yes. How many kind of blocks do we define the last day? Mainly, we presented more or less two different kind of blocks. One is conceptual blocks. If you remember, I proposed an example, and it's like a swimming pool system with different subsystems and different components. And also, we said that there are another element, these are value types, another element that we can use. And also, finally, we talk about primitive types. So, the main elements we are going to use are these three: blocks, value types, and primitive types. So, we mentioned that block definition diagrams are mainly focused on the structures. That means all the components or elements we are going to put inside are blocks that are representing concepts. And the most important relationship we are going to display here are composite relations. So the main associations will be composite associations. But also we can add some reference association. This is the next part we're going to talk about. So this is more or less the structure of block definition diagrams, where we have the root is the name of the system that is composed by different elements, different blocks, and for example, the mount assembly is also composed by some of the different blocks. And in the block definition, in the internal definition diagrams, we also have here some diagrams, some blocks, and here in addition, we put some new elements to represent for relationships, but also ports. Ports is something like interfaces. So it's the specific name we are going to use for interfaces. This is our example. And when we talked last week about blocks, this is the things we are modeling. The elements were blocks, value types, some relationships, and of course you can include also some actors and some constraints and some comments. This is the part we're going to talk today. And in addition, how to create this kind of internal block definition diagrams. Block definition is something we mentioned last week, so I don't like to spend more time here. And maybe this is also important. Each block mainly has three different kind of components, three different kind of properties or features. In the first structural features, and we said there are four different kind of features: parts, references, value, and ports. Two more features to model the behavior of this block. And finally, some constraints to adapt or to modify the expected behavior, even to define some rules that must be contained in the block, inside the block. Here we also mention some recommendations to start doing these modeling activities. And this was more or less the first approach. If you remember last week, we said this conceptualization is an iterative process, so we have to do it more than one iterations. So now, in the case of our example, we have a swimming pool, we also have a reservoir, we also have water pump, we also have a water pump controller, and a swimming pool panel, and of course water. The next, if you remember, we said which are the main properties for each one. For the swimming pool, these are the properties we decided last week. And these require and provide information. It's important for us to start identifying which are the relationship between different blocks. To model which blocks are flowing in our diagrams and which information are we sharing between different elements. So if you remember, the representation for blocks is like a picture. We have several compartments, and if you remember, in Papyrus we can adapt, we can modify which compartments we would like to show, to display in our screen. But by default, attributes and operations are displayed, but also we can modify the compartments visually. So for properties, if you remember, we mentioned about value properties that describe quantifiable classifiers and characteristics of our system. Part properties that describe the decomposition. So there's a whole part relationship between components, and reference properties that highlight or that displays which kind of blocks or how blocks are related one each other, but without a kind of relationship whole part. In the first, the part property means the system is composed by all these components, all these blocks. So if I remove the block in the root, the other blocks will be also removed. But reference properties will work in a different way. If I remove one property, for example, I remove the root block, the other blocks still remain in our model. So if we remove one, the reference blocks will not be removed. So value types, we mentioned the three types: structure, private, and enumerated. And part properties reflect this composition between different blocks. So if you remember last week in Papyrus, we start working with a diagram with less blocks than today. And we started with the main block, the swimming pool control, and also we have the swimming pool control panel, the swimming pool, and the rest. And as I mentioned before, we can change, we can adapt the compartments we would like to display. Here in the block, in the swimming pool control block, we have available the parts compartment. If you remember, it's simple. Maybe I can do zoom in. Right button, filters, show hide compartments. As we don't have any operation, we can remove it and keep parts and references. There are no references for swimming pool control, but we can also do the same with pump. And for us, a pump, I can adapt and select to display, I can remove operations, and I would like to show references. I'm going to remove full ports and flow properties. Yes, flow properties also. And once the compartment is enabled, I can show the elements of the references. In our case, we have some properties like reservoir, maybe could be one. Filter is not water. It's water pump controller. Yes. This, and finally, maybe yes. Whoa. So I can so we can change how compartments are displayed, and that's all. So if you remember, the part property was represented by composite association, or highlights these composite associations. And if you remember last week, we mentioned composite association are always within two different blocks with a kind of relationship. One block will be the whole part of the system, and the other element, the other block will be the part end of the relationship. One describing the whole, the other describing the parts. And the notation that you have seen is a solid line between blocks and an open arrowhead in the part end of the composition. If you also remove if you remember from last session, when you add this kind of composite association, we have this definition, and in the properties of Papyrus, we have two different parts. In the left part, we have the part N, that means the block that receives the association. In the right part, the composite N, we have the whole part of the composite N. It is very important here to highlight that the part N will be classifier, and in the composite part we have to select the owner is the association. As a result of this definition, in the part section, in the part compartment, we have the relationship hierarchy. The name, that means the role of the relationship, is assigned with the name of the part N. So this is the name of the part property of the whole part. Okay, so this is one of the kind of relationships. Let me go back again. But we also have some different kind of relationships between blocks. So the first, maybe something that you know previously to this course, is generalization. This generalization association is used to create hierarchies between different classes. So generalization led us to have a hierarchy between different, or to define a hierarchy between different blocks. So generalization is a transitive relationship. That means if we have a root block as the root of the hierarchy, and this root has some childs, and for example, if the gyroscope could also have some childs, that means that the childs of gyroscope will be also childs of sensors. So it's the transitive relationships is applied to this kind of generalization association. In the case of Papyrus, it is represented by a solid line with a hollow and triangular arrowhead at the end. So in this is the relationship like this class, subclasses, or types, subtypes, and so on. So I think it's time for you, because if I spend the whole 3 hours talking, it's very boring for you. So I think it's time to think how to apply this kind of generalization in the example we worked last week. So I think it's very simple. Maybe we can move to the types, and for example we can consider maybe not types, sorry. Here we mentioned at the beginning of this exercise that we have water. But could we define a hierarchy based on water? For example, we are building a system to control a swimming pool, and maybe we would like to fill the swimming pool not with water, but for example with concrete, or maybe with Coca-Cola or something like that, or with coffee. So for us, maybe it could be simple or very easy to create a hierarchy based on fluids. So now it's time to create a new block and to define a hierarchy based where water is a child. So what I propose to you is to create a hierarchy where we need a root block, but maybe this could be a fluid. And like a child, as a child of fluid, we have water. So, block. So, 5 minutes to do it. No more. 5 minutes. Okay, some recommendation. As you are going to create a generalization, do you think that it's better to have all these structures put in the same diagrams than the main one? No. So best is to create a new one, create a new diagram at the same level, of course, but you can create a new one. I have to find my mouse here. So add a new diagram, a new block definition diagram. Maybe the name could be hierarchies. And of course, as we have water, we don't have to create the water again. It's enough if I drag and drop. And of course, as the same last week, I can change the compartments to be displayed. Maybe I like to show attributes and constraints, for example. Yes. And also to show, contents, and to show properties. And that's all. So it's time to create a hierarchy where water is a child of something. So we can add a new one, a new block. The name could be fluid. Of course, you can decide if you prefer that this is an abstract concept or not. So you can specify that fluid is abstract. That means it is not possible to create blocks specifically based on fluid. So you have to only implement and to have instances of its childs. And the generalization is simple. You have here in the palette, you have a generalization. It's enough. Sorry, I did it in the wrong direction. Press first in the child and then in the root class, in the root block. It's enough. So if I would like to add a new one, for example, concrete. Okay, so everything is a block. So why is it important for us to have this kind of hierarchy when you are modeling a system? Why is it important?
Because the chance comes with the same attributes.
Yes. Yes. So when you have to define this kind of hierarchies, the most important thing is to identify or even to analyze which are the attributes that all the child have in common. Those attributes should be moved, the main, in that case, to the root of all the childs. And it is also useful when you want to have some common behavior directly derived from the root child, from the root block. And this behavior is also adopted by all the childs. So it's also this kind of relationship is very important. So in our case, maybe density could be moved from here. Okay, but I think to show how to create generalization relationships is enough. Let me change the look and feel of this association. Okay, that's right. Okay, so have you finished? Yes, of course. Where in the case of your lab assignment, do you have in mind some of this kind of relationship? I think it's clear. Think a couple of minutes more about it.
Emergency service?
Yes. We can define a root block like emergency services, some general properties, and from these emergency services you can derive fire engineers, policemen, ambulances, and so on. So this is important to highlight this structure of the emergency services. Okay, so let's continue. What happened? So let me highlight only the last sentence of the slide, the last idea. Some of the features here in the hierarchy and structure you have defined here, some of them could have some values that could be calculated, or maybe they are derived. Some the values of another values in the hierarchy. That means it's something like a calculated value. You have to do some operations, so the value is not should be provided directly. So when you have one specific attribute, one specific feature with this characteristic, you can write in the UML that it is a derived properties. When a property is derived, so you change the modifier from false to true. That means the value for this specific property is calculated. That means I don't have to provide this value, so in some sense, and maybe applying some different formulas, it should be done. Okay. So let me go back to the presentation. So as I mentioned before, two different types of associations. Composite is something that we talked before and has been explained before, so I don't need to spend more time here. Composite association, you are familiar with this kind of associations. And the next is reference association. As I mentioned before, this kind of relationship is applied to two blocks that has a connection in the system, but having some dependencies between that. In that case, those instances can access each other, cross this connection to share data or maybe to get access to the content of these specific features. In the case of Papyrus, the notation for this kind of reference association in block definition diagrams is a solid line between two blocks with open arrows at the end of the solid line, and the arrow means which block has access to the other. In the case of Papyrus, when you create this reference association, the connection is in both directions. So you have both arrow lines when you create. So this is not unidirectional access, but bidirectional access. What is the meaning of this kind of associations? As in the case in the composites case, each reference association creates a reference property. That means on the ends of the relationship, of the associations, we assign roles, that means names, and this is the name of the property. So in our case, we have the reference association here with the line, the solid line, and the same than before. In the left hand, we have a block to describe one of the ends of the relationship, and in the right hand, we have the other part. As I have mentioned before, in the references compartment, we have a property reference with the name described in the role of the association. What is the meaning of that? Based on this association, or this association represents that in the block with the name flight computer, we have a reference property that is linked to the electrical power subsystem, so we have access to the elements inside of the information and properties and methods, or maybe in general operations defined in block through this. And just in the opposite, at the electrical power subsystem, we have a reference property FC, this flight computer, with the name, so it's referencing to flight computer. On each end, you can modify the multiplicity of the role, or in that case, yes, of the role. The meaning of this multiplicity is that when multiplicity is 1, means that there is only one electrical power subsystem connected to the flight computer. But when the multiplicity is greater than 1, you are explicitly deciding how many different instances of this type are available. In our case, we are mentioning here that a flight computer could have only one electrical power subsystem, but one electrical power subsystem could provide support to, in that case, 2 to 3 flight computers. This is the multiplicity that we have assigned to this example. Maybe it's something stupid. Maybe it could be better in the opposite, just in the opposite, that a flight computer should have more than one. This is only an example. Okay, so this is the reference association. So go back to our example, and in our file, we have several blocks. Let me open the same you have. And I forgot to remove this, so you have more of the work done today. So, do you think that is there any other reference association? I think yes. For example, in this diagram, we have defined several reference associations. For example, one linking or relating the swimming pool with the swimming pool control panel. It is clear that this kind of relationship is one-to-one. Multiplicity in that case is 1. In the right part, we also describe a relationship, the same more or less than before, between the pump and the water pump controller. But maybe we can also define another relationship, for example, between pump and reservoir. We can say that maybe this could be different than one-to-one. And some relation, some reference relationship that, or reference association that is still missing, is something to highlight the relationship between the pump and the swimming pool. So it's time to define or to create this association. The idea is the swimming pool could be connected to one or more pumps. If we only have one pump, maybe the time to fill the swimming pool could be very large. So maybe we can have more than one pump. So please add to your diagram this association. Do you know how to do it? I think it's not very difficult. Don't forget associations. It is a kind of, in the palette you have association, so click on association and then click on one block, click again in the other one block. Oops. All right. So, for example, we can say that a swimming pool will have more than one pump. So maybe we can decide that we have 4 pumps, and a pump is only attached to one swimming pool. You can put the name you prefer. Yes, you write your own name. Okay, once you have finished, don't forget, every time you add a new component or new graphical element to your design, don't forget to validate if you have done the things in the right way. Don't forget to do it. Have we done the things right? Do you think yes or not?
You commented before that in this case, this relationship has an arrow in each.
Yes. Yes. What happens if we try to validate this model? It works or not? Maybe not. Maybe yes. I think we have some errors. Why? This is the common error you are going to get 99% of the time you spend with Papyrus. What's the problem here? It's always the same. Let me see the error here. Papyrus is telling you, okay, there is a problem. Because in the UML metamodel of SysML, when you said that one of the roles in a relationship is an association, it's an association. So when an instance of a property meta class is typed as by a block, that means you are getting access to a block. It's a complex structure. You have to create a composite association. But this is not the idea behind of this relationship. So we have to change the modifier of our relationship. So this is not an association, it is a classifier. It is a classifier, it's not an association. So the difference with association and classifier means classifiers enable Pythons to create a property for a reference property. So press now classifier. It should work. So we don't have errors now. So please show in your blocks that the reference property has been created. So we have to change the filters for the swimming pool block to display or to show the references compartment. And again, don't forget that this is a two-step operation. First, enable the compartment and then show the elements in the compartment. Oops. This is yes, this is the property. So when to use this kind of relationships? Okay. So is it clear when to use a composite association, a generalization, and a reference association? Is it clear when to use each one? Sometimes Papyrus is not very usable. Okay. I think it's nice now. Okay, so when to use composite? When the relationship is because of a composition. The block is part of the other one. When to use a reference? When the block is not part of that component. In the example, the pump is not part of the swimming pool. It's placed in another place. It's allocated in another place. And again, the swimming pool is not a pump because they are two different concepts. But all of them are parts of the swimming pool control system. So this is the maintenance. The maintenance. Okay. So let me continue with some modifiers. These are modifiers for features, for different properties. All these modifiers can be applied to each element in your block. For blocks, for so the meaning, the simple one is, the more simple one is read only, means that the value of this feature cannot be changed during the lifetime of the block. you create the block and you apply, you assign a value for this property, and this property will never be changed until the next time you are creating a new one, of course. Static means that that property has the same value in all the instances of that block. Don't forget that you are building here different diagrams, and you are including several times the same class. Maybe you are using the property in different places and in different diagrams in the XML project. So the static means that every time you are referencing on a specific block, every time has the same value. Independent, because it's the same for all the instances we implemented of that block. It's like a static variables in Java and in some other languages. Derive means, as I mentioned before, that values are obtained from some other values. And this typical value applied to calculated values. Normally, when you consider that a property is derived, the normal situation is to also put through the read-only field, the read-only modifier. Because you don't have, it is not allowed for you, you don't have permitted rights enough to change the value. Ordered means that values in case of collections or in case of lists are always be displayed in the same order. And unique means that if you have a collection, consider, for example, we can have a property with 10 elements. Unique means that in case of duplicated values for one of these specific instances, you only display one. If I have several times the same value on the screen, we only display one. Okay. You still have time. It's only 7 o'clock. If you don't mind, we can make a short break, maybe in 10 minutes or 15 minutes. Maybe 7:15 or something like that. Yes? Any question? Okay, so the last. Nos quedan 10 minutos. Que paramos en cuarto. No, ahora. So the last dependency, or the last association or kind of association, are dependencies. Dependencies is the way to highlight in your BDD a kind of relationship like a client-server. So we have some clients and we have suppliers. That means we don't have a whole part relationship. So we are not getting access to all the elements of another class, but we need to get some services of that. So we are using the services provided by another block. But the block is not part of us, and the block is not part of one of our properties. So in that case, we define dependencies. Dependencies when the supplier element change. The meaning of this relationship is that if the supplier change some of the values, we are notified about these changes. Normally, this kind of relationship is represented like a dashed line with an open arrowhead from the block that has from the client to the supplier. In the example, the block in the bottom is the client, and the data handling is the supplier. So I think in our example, we don't have this kind of relationships. So we are not going to use in our example. Some decorators that we can add to the BDD. Something like actors. Of course, actors for us is someone that has internal, that can have or can act or perform some different operations with the system. And it's the same concept that you have seen before with Jennifer in the use case diagram. The idea is to explicitly highlight that these people have some interactions with different parts of the system. In the case of our swimming pool control system, maybe we can highlight some operators, with the control panel at the swimming pool, and also with the panel for the pump control. So I think it is not needed now to add this kind of elements, but consider that in the diagram. You can, in your lab assignment, you can do it. Or maybe you must do it. In terms of clarify the diagram. Example, you can highlight ambulances, and maybe you can create an actor over there. That could be the ambulance driver. And at the central and the control operations center, maybe you can present here the operator that is getting information from the platform and is the people in charge to do some actions. You can highlight at this level this kind of interactions. Of course, based on this representation, it's very funny. Of course, you can also create you can create hierarchies. Generalization is also applied to actors. Constraints, let constraints till the end, because it's more important to start with the second part. But constraints, in brief, is another is another block that you can define to apply some restrictions for the system. So let me explain this concept before. So the idea is to create these kind of blocks and with different expressions and so on. And of course, you can add to explain some details of your diagram comments. Nothing relevant about comments, but there are 3 different kinds of comments or predefined comments, rationale, problem, and diagram descriptions. Name it's enough, the name, to explain. I think you are writing there. So now it's time for the break, because after the break we will continue with the internal block diagram. Okay. Okay, so let's continue with the last part of this session. I'm sorry, I don't know your name, but he has just asked me a question, very interesting. Ramon, what's your name? Ramon. Thank you, Ramon, for your question. He told me, okay, but an actor, what could be what or who could be an actor? Because maybe most of you can consider that actor could be also people or some person that can interact with the system. So an actor for us, in the term of systems could be someone or something that has an external interface with our system. That means, of course, an operator will be an actor. But if you have another external system that is giving you inputs or is consuming your data, it is also another actor. In profiles, I think we have a problem. In the last version, in the previous version, no, but in the last, the only metaphor for actors is this. Sometimes you can use this different metaphor to represent people than systems. But of course, maybe time scheduler could be, or maybe time system that is giving you feedback or some heartbeats.
Any interface to an third party can be a...
Yes, yes, of course. Any third party that is consuming data is another actor. And also if the actor is providing you data. So it's something that, well, is something or someone that has external interfaces, and you need them. You need them to work or to interact with the system. Okay, so don't forget, because there is not only person or not only people. Okay, so let's continue with the second part of the conceptualization diagrams. And now we are focused on internal block diagrams. Again, like block definition diagrams, they are also based on UML. And the most important thing for us is that this kind of diagrams are applied to each block. So the context of all the elements in the diagram are blocks in isolation. That means I will be focused only on one block and its internal properties and the internal components of the block. So for us, what is outside the block is not relevant, not for the moment, but later, yes, it would be interesting. But we are focused on modeling what is happening inside the block. Of course, in the case of your lab assignment, the context for the root system is all when you define the internal block definition of the root system, you are getting access to each specific block. In the case that we presented before, the eCall, the PSAP drones, so you are getting these elements so you can model some dependencies between them. But later, when you select, for example, drones, you are only getting access to drones and their internal properties without information about the outside. So the context is what is happening inside the block. So, yes?
But sometimes you need input data.
Yes, but we are going to model input data based on a concept that I will explain later, is a port. So when you need data from outside, you have to define a port that is an interface with outside. So you get this information through ports, and the ports information from the ports is moved to the specific blocks that are processing this data. So but for me, the important thing is, once we are focused on the internal thing, the internal components and properties of a block, nothing outside the block is relevant for me. Nothing that is not part of a block must be displayed. So, these diagrams captures the internal structure of a block in terms of properties and connections. Here is where we explain how blocks, how the elements are connected each other. So this is where we highlight these connections. So that when you create a new internal block diagram in Papyrus, the palette is different, because the things you can do in this kind of diagrams and the elements you can add in this kind of diagrams is different than in a block definition diagram. So the palette is different, so the things you can do are absolutely different. So when you create this block, it of course includes all their properties and of course its values, all the things that you can have in the block definition diagrams. When you do the display, you get access to all the content, all the compartments. So this diagram can get access to all the information in the compartments of a block. So internal block diagram is created for a specific block. This is also important. And of course, we're taking access or getting access to each internal elements. Okay, so by default, not all the properties will be displayed, so you have to visualize the elements and the components. A very important thing here is that if your block is very complex, you don't have to do it all, you don't have to highlight everything in the same diagram. So the most important thing here is that divide your diagram, your block structure, or maybe block internal structure, in several diagrams, highlighting the relevant concepts. So in the case of your diagram, maybe if you have 5 or 6 blocks, it is not possible to represent in a clearly way all the dependencies between each component. It's part of the block. So it is better to divide the internal structure in several diagrams, in order to clarify, of course, all the concepts related with the same functionality should be placed in the same diagram. But if you are having different behaviors, use different diagrams. Okay, so capture the internal structure of a block, and all the properties connected appear, and the context and the things that are available is only the block. How to start with this kind of diagrams? It's not.
I have a question.
Okay.
So far we have defined several levels in the block diagram, right?
Yes.
So one block might be dependent on other ones, right? That are more specific.
Yes.
So if we have to make an internal block diagram for each block we have defined, I'm afraid that maybe we might be redundant in some of these definitions, right?
Yes, it could happen. Yes, but it depends on the complexity of the diagrams you are building. So if you can put everything in only one diagram, you can do it.
Yeah, because when you show the diagram that we have in the whiteboard,
Yes.
In the top we have drums, right?
Yes.
The drum blocks, and then we have another ones that depends on it.
Mm-hmm.
But the ones that are below are more specific block diagrams, right?
Mm-hmm.
So how fit into, or how specific should be the definition of the drum diagram? Because in the future, or maybe when you build the internal block diagrams of the blocks below, these ones will be the specification of each functionalities of the drones.
Oh, yes.
So how deep, how can you be, I mean,
In the case of your lab assignment or in the real world?
yeah, in the real world.
Yes.
In the real world.
Okay, so the most important thing when you are doing this exploitation of the diagrams is that you need to go to the lowest level or the highest level with detail is the one you can start with implementation. So the concepts or the main blocks, or maybe if you try to translate these to classes, when you have specific classes that you can implement it without dependencies. Of course, with this kind of diagrams, if you make a bottom-up approach, if you have too much detail on the bottom, you can prepare some abstractions on the upper level, and you only display the relevant information and so on. You can do some groups, some different kind of groups to represent or to isolate the things you are presenting in a diagram. But how deep? If it depends on the complexity of your system. Sometimes you need 3 levels or maybe 4. It depends on the complexity. Maybe in the case of a complex system like this, in a system of systems, maybe not all the systems will have the same level of detail.
And regarding the block diagram that we have drawn, that we have drawn in the
VDD
in the whiteboard.
Oh, okay.
Right.
Yes.
In the whiteboard. When we draw drones block. Yeah.
Yes.
Right.
Yes, I think that I have just understood what you want to ask me.
When we have to define the internal block diagrams of the drone block.
Yes.
I don't know. What we should write regarding this block, because the following ones are the ones that are important for us, right? They are the ones that will provide details.
Yes, but these blocks are important for you when you are analyzing drones.
Sure.
But when you are at this level, maybe this level of detail is not relevant for the first level. For me, it's enough maybe deciding that you need to get there only a GPS or maybe some coordinates. And maybe for the drone's system as a whole for you, it's enough. What is happening inside is not relevant at this level. But when you go inside, you go deep in drones, maybe you have to validate this, and maybe you have to validate data, maybe you can split this information, and you can start defining some different connections between these components. And here is where you are adding these details. But these details are relevant at this level, but when you go deep for the next, you explode this in some other blocks and some other references. Each one has some, the context for each one is absolutely reduced, maybe it's allocated to a small part of the system. And only when you need to share data or information between different levels is when you have to present here, to make visible these internal parts. You can do it. And XML enable you or have the capability to do it. But it is only recommended when this specific module or this specific part of this subsystem of drones is needed or is required to get data or to get information at this level. So try to do not mix and do not put together things with different levels of abstraction. So the most important thing at the beginning is to, in one diagram, put only elements with the same level of abstraction. And then go deep and to analyze what is happening here. And the same, put at the first level the most important blocks, and then go deep, analyzing and decomposing each block. Of course, at the internal block definition, you can also highlight or present some deeper modules or different blocks. I think one of my ideas is to show you how to do it today. So, it's time to create a new diagram. So for us, we would like to get the internal structure of the system. That means I want to know from the swimming pool control system which are the relationships and the connectors between these specific components. And later we will decompose, for example, the pump. And again, we will analyze what is happening inside a pump in order to analyze and to get to know how to handle these kind of different diagrams. So first of all, we are going to build an internal block definition for the swimming pool. So please select the Model Explorer. Oops. Select the swimming pool control. It is composed by all these parts. Right button. Next diagram is a renew diagram, internal block diagram. What's the name? For us will be swimming pool control. Let me do it. Internal block diagram, swimming pool control. No. Swimming pool control. Okay, so this is the internal block diagram. Here you can see on top the name of the block, and it belongs to the stereotype of blocks. But it is absolutely empty. How to visualize the components? How to do it? Yes, you can select filters, hide, show compartments. In our case, it's very simple because we would like to work at the internal structure level. So I prefer, but it's only my preference, to show internal structure. And now I would like to show the contents. So for me, it's important what is happening inside. And now it's time to visualize the connections between these components, between these blocks. Okay, so maybe we can get on top the swimming pool panel control. Maybe just behind swimming pool, reservoir maybe could be here, and also we have a pump over there. Water maybe could be here, and water pump controller. Okay, it's enough. Okay, so it's up to you to allocate the elements. So okay, what's the next? Modeling parts in internal block diagrams. So the idea with this diagram is to enable parts to be connected one to each other using connectors and ports. Because composition has been displayed in the previous diagram, not here. How many elements will be available at these diagrams? All the parts in the whole part relationship of the previous diagram. So all the part properties will be here. And the multiplicity for each one will be displayed on each one. So how are we going to connect parts in the internal block diagram? It's not very complex. This diagram is used to show connections, and the tool we are going to use, or the element we are going to use is connector. First of all, we have to decide which connectors we are going to put in relationship. Okay, so in our case, for example, we can decide that we have a connection between the swimming pool control panel, and the swimming pool. Okay, so we get access to the palette, select connector, and we said, okay, there is a connection between the swimming pool and the panel. And maybe we also have a connection between the reservoir and the pump. And connection, a connector again from the pump, to the swimming pool. And finally from connector. Okay, maybe this could be a schema of different connections. In the case you prefer only to highlight or to model one part of the behavior, don't forget to change the name. This is the internal block diagram swimming pool, but maybe you prefer to model only the relationship between pumps, reservoir, and panel controller, and pump controller. Create the diagram with this part. And in addition, you can create a new one for the pump, swimming pool, and the swimming pool controller. So don't forget, don't hesitate or split the diagrams to reduce the complexity of the diagrams. Okay, so connectors is the tool that we use to indicate which is the relationship between blocks. Connectors can be also connected to ports, but it's something that we are going to do later. So the interaction between parts of a block is specified by behaviors, represent the behavior of the system. So, but there is a problem here. How can we model which information is flowing in and flowing out of a block? And which information are we sending from one block to the other? So this is the next step. First, we identify the connectors, and the second is to identify two different things. Which information can flow in and flow out of each element of each block, and then which specific data are flowing through the connectors. Two different concepts. In our case, it's something that we must do in advance, is which information should flow from here flow out from here, and which information should flow in. Must be provided and information that we are providing. And we have to do the same for each specific block. First of all, to know the data we need to get from outside and the data we are providing to the other blocks. So as the system is quite complex, maybe we are only interested on to model 1 or 2 or more because of the complexity of the system. So maybe we can think about pumps. I think it's not very complex, and I think it has some interesting things to model and to work with them. Okay, so let me continue with the slides. The interaction, as I mentioned before, may include some flow inputs and outputs between different parts. And we also have to determine the direction, which information is flowing in and flowing out. A connector may be tied by an association. It's something that we are going to do later, not now. But it's important to consider now, in the case of the example we are doing here, as we said, okay, there is a connector from the swimming pool to the swimming pool controller. In the real world, this means that we have a hardware here, that is the swimming pool. We have the swimming pool control panel here, and there is a cable that links together the connector panel with the swimming pool. So the control panel with the swimming pool. This is the idea behind connectors. So now we have to decide, once we have the connector, which information could flow from one place to the other place. And which information is, for example, the swimming pool waiting for, and which information is providing from the swimming pool to the controller. In our case, we have the pump. Here, pump is connected to some pipes. To the swimming pool. So, what is moving from here?
Water.
Water. Of course. What is flowing from here to here? Water level. Okay, so this is a very important thing, because first of all, we have identified these names or these elements. And in the case of SysML, we have a specific name for this information. The name is flow property. Something that, let me continue with the idea behind connectors. So what's happening with the connector? We are telling, or we are displaying here that there is a good relationship between the swimming pool and the control panel. But in the previous diagram, in the BTT, previously we have decided that there is a reference association. Do you remember that we made that reference association between the swimming pool and the... You didn't. I did it last day. Because there is a connection. That means you can decide that this connector is based on a reference association. That means when we put together the connector with the association, we are including semantic in the connection. Because the connector at this diagram, at this level, it has no semantic information. So you can put together different things. And if you want to assure that only data from here to here following the schema defined at BDD, or maybe different schema defined at BDD, you can put here, you can specify that this connector is following a reference association. So this is the concept highlighted in the slide. So a connector may be typed by an association defined previously. And why to do it? To check the compatibility between the parts it connects. And of course, the parts at the end of the connector must satisfy the constraints imposed by the association. So that means, before to do this, from here we have to say pump is providing data for the water, but here we are waiting for water. So we need also define water here. So this is an output flow, and at this level from the water, sorry, from the swimming pool is an input, is an in, sorry, is an inflow. And just the opposite for the water level. Water level is an output from the swimming pool and is an input. Yes? So, we are now talking at two different levels of abstraction. With connectors, we are doing only the connection between the elements. And with flow properties, we are defining the kind of things that can flow from one side to the other side. So, here's the next thing we are going to do. Let me go back later. So, flow properties should be specified at block level. So, where to define these properties? Keep in mind that flow properties are not specified here. Why? Why do you think that flow properties are not available here, but they are available here? Why do you think it happens? Because? Yes, but not. It's not the right answer.
Because the relationship between the blocks are defined here. At this level, what are the things we are defining for each block? The concepts that the block is managing. So this property is a conceptual property. That means a block enables the capability to receive this kind of data. Maybe in the real world you never will receive data, or maybe at one moment you stop receiving this data. So water maybe is not flowing anymore through these pipes. But the concept is still associated to the block. So flow properties are defined at BDD level because they are part of the concept we are modeling. So previous to move to the internal block diagram, we need to create or to define the flow properties. Is it clear? More or less. So a flow property means which kind of items might flow between a block and the environment. So we are modeling concepts and parts of the block.
And in the internal block diagram, we are showing how these parts are connected. So this BDD is conceptual representation of the block, and internal is how these blocks are connected. So, as I mentioned before, flow properties are defined at block definition diagram, and the kind of items that flow is specified typing properties. So we have to describe the kind of items that can flow from one place to another place. For each flow property, we have to determine the name, the type of elements we can send, and the multiplicity and direction. So it's time to do it in the example. Consider for example, the pump. We have model here, yes, the pump and the swimming pool. How to add a flow property? As usual, drag and drop. We are modeling first, we have the pump level, we are modeling first that water is flowing out the pump. So, what's the name of the property? Name could be, for example, water flow. Which is the direction. Oh, see, you prefer, you can change the name. As later we are going to receive data from the reservoir, for example, we can say water to swimming pool. Water to swimming pool. It is an out flow property, and at UML you said, okay, the type, the item that can flow out through this property to outside is water. And that's all. We have said now that pump and through pumps it is possible to flow out water. Now we have to set up the block to get data from the controller. Sorry, from the swimming pool. Sorry. So in addition, we have to add a new flow property. In that case will be water level. Water level. Sorry. So water level for us is an in property, and type for water level is, do you remember the name of the type? Water level is blah, 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 blah. This value type. So for us, water level type is on types value type cubic meters. Okay. Now we have just defined that blocks have two flow properties, one in, one out. I think it's not very clear to show here flow properties, so it's better to customize the compartments to highlight or to show flow properties in this specific part. So something that you have to customize. The template. So filters, contents, we have to remove from here flow properties and then to display these flow properties here. Okay, I think it's much clearer now. We can also remove some compartments. I don't want to show now constraints, neither operations and full points. Okay. So we have to do the same, just on the other, just at the swimming pool level. Okay, so please do it as fast as possible.
I got lost in one thing.
Okay, where did you lost?
The flow when you did the flow property.
Yes.
The water to swimming pool. How did you assign it to the value of water? Like
Which flow property from the water?
from the pump that says water to swimming pool. How is it connected to water?
This, here, this flow property water to swimming pool. Okay.
Yes. How is it?
Yes.
Connected to the water?
Okay. Yes. This is not. The template for SysML said that these are the properties specific from SysML. But the type is not specific from SysML, but this is specific from UML. So you have to change to the UML palette, and here at the type field you can change.
Okay. Then assign it to the block water.
Sorry. Yes. Let me. Yes, yes, block water, yes. So here at this level with Papyrus there is maybe a small problem because of the direction of the input and output. In the previous version, it is simple to know which kind of flow is input and or output, but in this version, it is not possible to show in a graphical way. So I don't know why. Because some things has changed from the previous version from SysML 1.2 and SysML 1.4. Many things has changed. I think they are still adapting some functionalities. So please select here. The first flow property maybe could be following the same schema. Water to swimming pool. Maybe the name could be water from pump. It is an input, it's in, and the type is what? And a new one. Water level. This out. Okay, have you finished? Yes? So now we have two flow properties on each swimming pool. Sorry, on each block. Perfect. Okay, so now we have just created flow properties, and it is important when you want to flow data from one block to another to check the flow property compatibility. That means the ability of items to flow across connectors between parts is dependent on the flow properties specified for the connectors. For a flow that occurs from a source to a target, the flow property should be compatible in terms of hierarchy. That means maybe the type should not be the same, but should be compatible at the hierarchy level. And of course in direction. So we only can put together an input, an in and an out, one direction in and the other out, and the opposite. What happens if we put two different flows out together? It's a collision, so it's not possible. So first check the compatibility of your flow properties. As you can imagine, in this kind of diagrams, we can create many different connectors. And maybe the same data could be sent to many different blocks. So SysML, with the semantic of SysML, assures propagation of data. That means if you have one field here or one filter here that is flowing data, is provided to all the blocks connected to this specific component. Okay. So the flow propagation, as I mentioned, is if a part is connected to multiple parts that have compatible flow properties and a given connector representing multiple links, the value assigned to an outflow property is propagated to all the links. This number of external connections has a name. It's the fan out of the block. Fan out represents how many blocks are connected with one getting data from us. And just in the opposite, what is happening when a flow property on the other part is changing and we are collecting data from different sides. Maybe here we have some problems because if all the inputs are compatible, it is not controlled or it is not specified in SysML what should be the behavior. What is happening is based on one flow and two different flows, are accessing or getting different data, what is the behavior of the block. It is not it is not defined by SysML. So it's part of your mission to avoid this kind of situations. This concept is called CONIN. Consider you have a part that can get data from different sites. And you get from one block you are getting data for this specific property and from another property. So from another block to the same property. If you are getting data from both at the same time, what is the value you are going to get? It depends on you. It depends on how you specify maybe some constraints, some prioritization of different flows. It depends on how you program the solution. Okay, now for us it's clear. I hope that for you also. It's clear. We have connectors that represent, okay, we can send data from the swimming pool to the pump. This is the connector. We have a connection between both. We also have just identified the kind of information that can flow through this. As I mentioned before, to assure that the connector will work right, we would like to assign an association type to this connector. So don't forget to do it. As you have in your diagram, first of all, identify which is the relationship. In our case, is pumped into. This is the name of the association we are looking for now, because we are connecting one pump with the swimming pool. And the idea now is to set at this level this connector that connects the pump with the swimming pool is typed by the association pumped into. Okay, maybe we have lost one very important step. How many things have we done since the last validation? Ooh. So don't forget to validate now data. Validate the model. Oh, some problems. Maybe all of you have more or less the same problems. But I think the problem is always the same. I think the problem is always the same. What is happening here? The swimming pool, it's this flow property. But what is the meaning? Do you remember this error from the previous day? The error said, this property is typed by a block. So what happened when a property is typed by a block? What you should do? You have to create an association relationship, a composite. So instead of doing by yourself, it's very boring, please use the quick fix. Oops, not possible now? Oh, why not? What the hell? Use the quick fix. Quick fix. Maybe the problem is in another place here at the pump block. Oops, maybe the problem here is different.
Excuse me, can you repeat what is really happening with this kind of error?
Yes, I can explain again. Yes, okay, let me go back again. Here we have a flow property. It's the same than it happened before, if you remember yesterday or the day before yesterday here. every time you have a property where the type is not a simple type, that means the type is a block. In terms of UML, as this is it is a class. This means that there is a composition between this class, this block, and this. So we need to add this kind of relationship. Maybe you don't need to visualize this relationship, but because of the meta model, you have to do it. Because when you put a type as the related, or when you said that a feature or a property has a type, if it is a class part, you have to do it in that way. So every time you get this error, always you have to do the same. But I don't know why it doesn't work here. Oops, I don't have. Oops, maybe the error here is different. Block, swimming pool. Let me. Block 6 is swimming pool. This should be composite, so maybe the problem here is different, so that the property, let me find, I have to change the property, is sorry, it's because of the type of the attribute. So let me find which is at swimming pool class pump is the, I don't know what's the name of the attribute. I think this attribute should be composite. Yes, it is. This should be also composite, not. I don't, yes, this should be composite, yes, and this is not. This block 6. Let me take a seat. Do you have the same problem than me or not?
Yeah, I have.
So let me find the property, the specific property with the problem, because the problem is that in the properties of the specific feature, we have to change from known to composite. Element block class swimming pool. Yes, swimming pool. Maybe the problem is yes, maybe the problem is this. Yes, the problem maybe is this.
You fix the problem.
What? I don't know which properties.
You just changed all to composite. The SysML and UML properties of the flow property.
Of the flow property, which one?
Yes, on both. Just in
yes.
UML and SysML. He changed it to composite.
Right.
In both, okay, yes.
Both, okay.
Yes, I forgot to change to this because M3 is a value type, and value type is also a kind of block, so we also have to do it. Okay. In case of primitive types, you don't have to do it, but in case of this, value type is, yes, right. Here, composite here, and also.
So when the association is composite, the association and the properties need to be also composite.
Yes.
Always.
Yes, in that case. In the case of this, in the case of features with type with complex types. Okay, now we have the model without any error. Okay, so what's the next? Save often, save early. The next is to know, so flow properties, compatibility. Now it's time. So what? Please think what we have just done. We said the connector now is typed by the association. So if both parts of the connector doesn't complain the type, doesn't complain the end parts of the association, you will get an error. If you try to connect something that is and the end parts are not following the association, you will get an error. That means if you try to move the connector now from the swimming pool to a reservoir, you will get an error because you said this connector is restricted by the association. That means both parts should also follow the association. So you cannot connect blocks that are not part of the association. Okay, so item flow. Considering and following with the ideas we are handling in this schema with the flow, we have the connector here. We have just specified the connector and the rules to make things flowing from the pump to the swimming pool. We said water can flow from here to here. Now it's time to directly specify which items are flowing. So you have the connector, but maybe you can send using the same pipes water, or maybe you can use the same pipe to pump concrete, or maybe you can use the same pipe to pump beer or something like that. So now it's time to determine what is actually flowing through the connector. How are we going to do this? We use a new element that is the item flow, that specifies the type of items that are flowing in our diagram. So what we said now is in this specific diagram, I want to show I want to create a flow from pump to swimming pool, and using this specific element to tell that the item that is flowing is water. Because the connector, the pipe, the connector we have can handle many different kinds of fluids. So in this specific diagram, maybe in another diagram, you can create a different connector, for example, between the pump and the swimming pool to move concrete over the pipes. You can do it because the connector is, through this connector, it's able to handle different kind of fluids, for example. Is it clear? So now it's going to decide what is flowing through the connector. And the way we are going to do is using the component item flow. So an item flow describes the things that are flowing through the connector. So that we have to send select the first, select the second, and now we are telling here something is flowing from here to here in this specific diagram through this connector. Okay, so which are the fields we have to define here? So that the item flow specifies the type of flowing of item that is flowing and the direction. So we get from one side to another side. When the flow properties we defined before at the BDD describes the kind of things that can flow, this item flow specifically show the things that are flowing. So we can decide at this level each element of our hierarchy. That means if we said, okay, now in the flow property, we said something like a fluid can move from here to here. At this level, we can say one fluid, or maybe water, or maybe some different kind of fluids. So now we can specifically decide which item is flowing in this diagram. So that we have clicked from pump to swimming pool, and now I'm going to write a name here. The name could be water.
One question, for example, if you have a item flow of water on concrete and Coca-Cola, do you need to put all those item flows?
Yes,
Or can you
but but the question is, in this specific diagram, the thing that I am modeling is water is flowing from here to here. If maybe I need to do different things with concrete, we have to create a different item flow.
Yes.
So you have to model it. For each one, you have to model it.
Okay.
So the item property. In our case, the item property is a property from the pump. So we have to look for pump. It's sorry. Water. Yes. So we have selected the item property. We are using the flow property from here, that is water is flowing from here to here. And finally, with which specific item are we flowing now? Is water. So finally, yeah, right. What's the name of the relation? Is pump. Now we are telling here that through this connector we have an item flow that is composed by water that is flowing from here to here, and the property associated with this is water. Is water to swimming pool, I think was the name. Water to swimming pool is the items property here. We are flowing water from here to here. And to assure that data are flowing in the right way, we are following this association to validate the data, to validate the and both parts of the association. Okay, maybe it works or not. What do you think? Maybe if I'm asking you, the model is not valid. Why not? Because of the name of this association, the name of the item flow. We cannot, if we link item flow with a flow property here, the name must be the same. The problem here is that I said this is the name of this item flow was water, but as we decided to specify an item property, we have to put the same name. That means the name of the information, the name of the item flow must be water to swimming pool. Okay, it works. Now for us the semantic is more clear than before. We have a connection from pumps to swimming pool, and we explicitly said from here to here we can move water. So this is the semantic. Okay. The last part is ports. Okay. Let me send you briefly what is a port. Because there is a significant change between SysML 1.4 and SysML 1.2. Have you finished the previous part of the example or not? No? Please stop me. Okay. Are you lost or not?
Sure.
Where did you lost? 2 hours ago, or are you lost or not? No? Es una empresa establecida en la universidad. El problema es
que así con este nombre no puedes diferenciar cuál es cuál. Porque este jugador es un pool y este jugador es ¿cómo se llama? Water. Tu swimming pool que le pertenece al fondo.
Tío, me sale un error de mierda. No sé, bueno, un error normal.
Is it everything working?
don't have everything.
¿Qué nos dice? Pues, si no lo pones en el sí, se puede. Sí. El error que te declaras es el nombre. Sí, sí. No se puede declarar. El copy, sí, porque el otro es una asociación. El otro es una composite. Es que si no te lo estoy diciendo, es una asociación. En el IBD solo tienes asociaciones entre composiciones. Este lo has definido en el antes, en el BTD. Han dicho guión, la bomba, la piscina. Ese es el nombre de esa relación. Sí. No, lo pones solo seleccionando acá. Eso lo hiciste tú antes. Es el nombre de la asociación que está diciendo que todo eso vaya a través de esa asociación. Okay, so the last part, but not least, is the concept of port. I think that from other fields you have clear the concept of port. What is a port of, if you consider a computer, how many ports do I have in my laptop? Several ports. We have USB, some ports for USB-C and for the beamer and for the mouse and so on. So the concept behind ports is to encapsulate some part of the behavior and to encapsulate interfaces of the blocks, so that you can distinguish between some properties that are to interact with the environment from those parts that are only used inside the block. So behind the concept is where external entities can connect with our blocks. It's something like public properties in Java or in UML. You have features that are public so that all the things from outside can get access to the specific property. In the case of our SysML modeling, in the scope of BDD and EDD, ports are the way we have to determine which part of the block is public to get access from outside, and that should be used to interact with the block, and which part is not visible, or maybe it's only used or is only defined to represent the structure of the block. So ports is the way we have to define the boundaries of the block. We are explicitly defining these characteristics, these features are accessible or should be used, should they use to get access to the block. Of course, you can try to do it without using, but it is not the right way to do it. So ports are the way, different ways to define boundaries. We have two different kinds of blocks. As I mentioned before, this is a significant change from the previous versions. We have proxy ports and full ports. The behavior of that is absolutely different. So let me explain in brief what is happening behind proxy ports and full ports. What are full ports? You remember last week when we started defining properties of blocks? We said a block is a combination of different properties. If you decide that some of these properties are the only that should be used to interact with your system, these properties should be defined as full ports. That means it's a kind of property that you define to interact with the external blocks. Port should be used only to define the boundaries of your system. In our case, at the beginning we said water level is an internal property. Okay, but should water level be a property, or in our case, as you would like to get data from water level, should be a port, because you want to access that property. That means ports represent that properties of blocks that can be accessed from us. Full ports can contain, of course, different ports. What is the meaning of nested ports? What is the meaning? Let me show you with a small example. Consider we have a block and I decided that this is my port. So the representation is also different. So this is my port. But this port, of course, is typed by a different block. So you can say, okay, this port could be a complex block. This is typed by block 2. This is block 1. Okay, what happens if block 2 also have ports? Consider that this is block 2 with 2 ports. That means that as you are defining this port as typed by this port, really you have 3. You have nested ports. So that the representation will also be different. It will be something like this. So as you are modeling a system with many different complex structures, you can create this very complex structure with ports. So these are nested ports. Oh, next week I will upload to model a complete example with this kind of blocks. So internal pump, this is, I have just defined here this port, and the port is also composed by 2 elements, and each element has also different. So this is the way you are defining how to interact with my system.
Can you separate it like in a computer where you have the microphone port and the audio port, and you can use them independently, or and
yeah.
represent one of them to enable different uses?
Yes, it more or less could be the same, but it's more or less the same always that you are not using directly port, sorry, yes, if you are using directly the port of the microphone. So you are using here the port of the microphone.
One of them for the microphone, the other one for the audio.
Yes, you can have yes, or even in a power cable, you have 3 different cables. Yes, you can have more than one. This is very useful when you have to represent different cables, different wires, for example. For example, for a network where you have twisted pairs, you have 8 twisted pairs, you can also represent here as 8 different problems, 8 different.
So the audio port could be also a composed port.
Of course. So you can have a hierarchy as complex as you want. But depending on the level, maybe at this level, when you have only the external port of the computer, I don't need to get access to the internal port of the wireless. Okay, so these are ports. That means full ports are part of the block. Part of the block. Okay? The other concept is proxy. Proxy ports act as proxies of their own in blocks. That means I have put in a proxy. I don't have the property, but the property belongs to another block. But I am providing you the way to access. Consider, for example, you have the maybe the example could be valid. Following the example you mentioned before for the microphone, I have here the connector, but I am not really managing because I have some wires to the speaker, or maybe in my motherboard we have the real connection here. The port is not belongs to my system, so belongs to this part of the system, and I am exposing the port over there.
That would be the proxy port.
Yes. So proxy ports are not parts of the not part of the block, but they act as is they part of. Sorry, if these ports were owned. They define the boundaries by specifying which features of the internal block are accessible from outside. The only way to define these proxy ports is using interfaces. So there is a specific component in SysML that is interface. It is available here at BDD. Sorry, here at BDD. You have an interface block where you define the elements you are exposing from inside, the components you are exposing from inside. And that's all, because item flows is something that we mentioned before. And behavioral properties, only 2 minutes, no more. Behavioral properties are the same than methods or than operations that you can define associated to each block. Operations are like methods in UML. There's some small differences because there are 2 different kind of behavioral properties. One is operations. That is a behavioral feature that is synchronous. That means you make a synchronous call, you are waiting for the answer. And the second is reception. That is only an asynchronous invocation. So you decide that the interaction with the external blocks is based on synchronism. You need to define an operation, and reception is only for asynchronous combinations. Finally, considerations. Don't forget to do it, because you have to do the lab assignment based on that. Define your blocks in the real world. What are the names of your system? Depict each block and the relationships. and identify if the relationship is based on composition, reference, generalization, identify multiplicity, identify value properties, identify flow ports. That means the elements that are flowing out and flowing in from outside. Identify behavior, and of course, at internal block definition, don't forget to identify connectors and flow and items flow. And that's all. It's the things you have to do in your lab assignment. And next week we are going to start with the next lesson, but I promise you to upload a new version of this example with all these elements. I'll try to record a new video at home with all the things that you have to do to apply each specific part. So during the lecture I have done some of them, so you can reproduce tomorrow, because it takes maybe for almost 3 hours. It will take maybe 10 minutes or 20 minutes. So tomorrow in the morning I will upload the video so you can reproduce the lecture. Apologizes because I think it was very boring today, so apologizes for that. And I'll see you maybe in a couple of weeks, because next week Jennifer is coming for the model-driven part. Jennifer is coming the next 2 Wednesdays, and I will see you maybe the last week on Friday. So the last 5 hours about model-driven development are with me, and the 6 previous one are with Jennifer. Okay, so thank you all of you for attending my lectures.
Thank you.
And see you these days over there. Thank you.